The heavy oak door of my old house shuddered on its hinges, rattling the glass panes as if an unseen storm had blown it open. Footsteps thundered across the marble floor, sharp and fast echoing through the hallway where only moments ago the ticking of the grandfather clock had been the loudest sound. I froze a basket of freshly folded linens still in my hands. In 72 years, I had never heard my home sound like this. A sanctuary torn open by fury I couldn't yet name. If you're watching this now, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt that sudden shift when peace becomes chaos? And please tell me where in the world you're listening from. Your voices remind me I'm not alone in telling this story. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter of what unfolded inside these walls. My name is Eleanor Grant. I'm 72, a retired nurse, a widow who has lived alone for 20 years in this house just outside Seattle. This place with its ivy-covered bricks and quiet garden once felt like a fortress of memory and safety. It's where I nursed my husband through his final days, where I watched my son Nathan grow from a boy with scraped knees into a man with a family of his own. I believed these walls knew only tenderness and sacrifice. That belief ended the afternoon he came charging through the door with Madison, his young wife trailing close behind him like a shadow, sharpening his anger. I saw it in his eyes first, the same green shade he inherited from his father, but hardened now into something I scarcely recognized. His voice boomed through the house, shaking the silence I had been holding on to. "Mom, where are you?" That question, sharp as a blade, carried not the warmth of a son looking for his mother, but the demand of a man ready for battle. My fingers trembled against the linens, yet I steadied myself before stepping into the hall. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long bars of shadow across the floor, as if the house itself were bracing for confrontation. Nathan's fists clenched at his sides. Madison's lips pressed into a smile too thin to hide her satisfaction at the storm she had summoned. For a heartbeat, I wanted to retreat, to hide in the quiet corner of the library where Robert's books still lined the shelves. But this was my home. I would not surrender it, not to fear, not even to my own son. I met his eyes. The boy I once cradled was gone, replaced by a man whose rage made the air heavy and sharp. In that instant, I understood whatever peace I had been clinging to was already broken. What I didn't yet know was how much deeper this break would cut, or how far my own child was willing to go to claim what was never his. Nathan's voice crashed through the room like breaking glass. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" His face was red, his fists trembling at his sides. Madison stood a few steps behind him, arms crossed, her lips quivering in a pout of humiliation. She couldn't pay at the store, Mom. In front of strangers with a full cart of groceries. Do you know how that made her look? I steadied myself, though. Inside, my heart pounded like a trapped bird. I changed the password. "Nathan," I said quietly, my voice firmer than I expected. There were charges on my account I didn't recognize. It was my responsibility to protect it. He blinked, then his fury doubled. "Your responsibility? We're family. How dare you make decisions like that without telling us? That card is what we rely on." The words struck like a slap. We rely on. Not borrow, not ask, rely. As if my savings built over 40 years of double shifts and long nights were now some communal fountain for him and Madison to drink from whenever they pleased. "My card is not a family service," I replied, forcing each word through the tightness in my chest. "It is mine. I worked for it. I decide when and how it's used." Madison gasped as though I had cursed her. "So I'm just, what? A stranger in this family? After everything I do for Nathan, you'd rather see me embarrassed in public than help us." Her performance was almost flawless, eyes glistening, voice trembling, but I had lived long enough to know the difference between tears of pain and tears of manipulation. Still, Nathan moved closer, his body tense like he was preparing for a fight. "You've always helped everyone," he said bitterly. "Neighbors, friends, even distant relatives. And now when your own family needs you, you turn selfish. Selfish." That word pierced deeper than any shout. I thought of the mortgage Robert and I scraped to pay the tuition I covered, so Nathan could go to college, the down payment for his first condo. Had all of that vanished from his memory? Or worse, did he remember and simply not care? I drew a slow breath, willing my voice not to shake. Generosity is not the same as surrender, Nathan. Helping is not the same as handing over everything. I will not live my last years as a bank account with no name. The room fell into a dangerous silence. Nathan's eyes burned Madison's nails, drummed against her arm. In that pause, I felt the house itself holding its breath, the walls that once knew laughter, now straining under the weight of betrayal. What began as a password had already become something larger, darker. This was no longer about groceries or embarrassment at the checkout counter. This was about control minds slipping through their fingers and theirs tightening like a vice around me. And standing in that winter light, I knew this confrontation was only the beginning. The silence after my words pressed down like a heavy blanket, but inside me, memories began to stir, uninvited, relentless. Whenever Nathan accused me of selfishness, my mind dragged me back through years that told a very different story. I saw Robert again, pale and fading in the hospital bed, his once strong hands trembling in mine. When he passed, I was 42, suddenly, both mother and father to a boy still learning how to shave. Nathan was just 12, with green eyes that looked up at me in fear, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. I promised him then in the darkest night of my life that I would never let him feel abandoned. That promise became my compass. I worked double shifts at the hospital, balancing charts by day and emptying bedpans by night so that his life could stay steady while mine collapsed. Every check I earned was bent toward his future first, the braces for his crooked smile, then the tuition checks that drained me but kept him in a college dorm instead of a dead-end job. I gave him everything, sometimes even food, off my own plate when times were lean. And when the years passed, when Nathan finally stood on his own feet, I gave him the down payment for his first condo. I remember signing that check with trembling fingers, not because I doubted him, but because I felt Robert's absence like a knife. It should have been both of us together, sending our son into the world. Still, I smiled through the ache proud that every sacrifice had led him there. Nathan had been grateful once. I can still hear his voice, younger, softer, calling me his hero. He brought me flowers after his first paycheck. He hugged me tight the day he got his promotion. He used to be the boy who called every Sunday just to ask if I'd eaten. But then came Madison. She walked into our lives with manicured hands and a diamond smile as polished as the cars she arrived in. Nathan's eyes lit up in ways I hadn't seen since he was a teenager, and I wanted to be happy for him. I told myself love often comes in unfamiliar clothing, but I also remembered the first night she sat at my table, fork poised too delicately, eyes flicking around the room as if calculating what might one day be hers. It wasn't just instinct. My neighbor and oldest friend Linda Parker pulled me aside weeks later. "Eleanor," she whispered over our garden fence, "be careful with that girl. I've seen her downtown carrying shopping bags worth more than my mortgage. She spends faster than she breathes." I brushed it off, then unwilling to believe Nathan could be blinded by such glitter. Now standing in my own living room, hearing my son accuse me of selfishness, I realized Linda had been right. Madison hadn't just entered my son's life. She had rewritten it, and with every swipe of my card, she was slowly trying to rewrite mine. Linda's warning echoed in my mind long after that day by the garden fence. But the truth announced itself in numbers far louder than any whisper. The bank statements arrived crisp and clinical, yet each line felt like a betrayal carved into paper. Spa treatments, designer handbags, weekend parties with tabs higher than my monthly groceries, none of it resembled survival. All of it screamed indulgence. My money wasn't keeping my family afloat. It was feeding Madison's appetite for glitter. When I asked Nathan about it, my voice steady but low, he didn't pause to reflect. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he barked a word that sliced me open, miser. I had heard insults in my life hurled in ER waiting rooms by patients in pain, muttered by exhausted colleagues under fluorescent lights, but never from my own son, miser. as if 40 years of sacrifice, every double shift, every holiday I worked instead of celebrated had meant nothing. I remembered nights leaning against cold tile walls in the hospital, gulping coffee at 3 a.m., stitching wounds until my hands ached because Nathan needed braces, because college tuition was due, because one parent had to be enough for two. Miser. The sting of that word lingered, and before I could catch my breath, fate delivered an audience to my humiliation. That afternoon, the doorbell rang, and standing there was David Miller. His hair had gone silver, his frame a little stooped, but his handshake was still the steady anchor I remembered from Robert's funeral. He had been Robert's closest friend, a lawyer who had since retired, and he'd stopped by simply to check on me. He stepped into my living room just as Nathan's voice rose again, sharp with accusation. "Why do you count every dollar, Mom? Why do you make us beg? You have more than enough. What are you saving it for your grave?" David froze in the doorway, eyes darting between mother and son. The shame of being exposed in such a raw moment flushed through me. Yet in that shame was also a strange, bitter relief. Someone else could finally see what had been festering behind closed doors. I stood taller, though my knees trembled. "Nathan," I said, "you will not speak to me this way in my home." But he only scoffed, his gaze sliding toward Madison, who leaned smugly against the wall as though she had already won a silent game. That look between them told me this wasn't a slip of the tongue. It was a strategy. David cleared his throat, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Nathan, your mother deserves respect. If Robert were here, he'd remind you of that." The name Robert hung in the air like a ghost. Nathan flinched but said nothing. For a heartbeat, silence stretched taut, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I realized then that money hadn't just become a disagreement. It had become a wound, infected, spreading, threatening to sever the last bond between mother and son. And in David's steady gaze, I also saw something else, the faint spark of an ally, someone who might stand with me when the storm grew darker. After David left that day, I tried to steady myself with small rituals, watering the geraniums, setting the kettle on the stove, folding the linens Nathan had scattered in his fury. But even as I moved through the motions, something gnawed at me. The insult miser still echoed in my ears, but worse than the word itself was the certainty that it had not come from Nathan alone. It had Madison's polish all over it, the way she shaped his anger into sharpened blades. Later that evening, while searching through my old oak cabinet for a box of photographs, I stumbled across something I hadn't placed there. Tucked beneath Robert's will in a bundle of yellowed letters lay a photocopy of my credit card, both sides perfectly clear, including the 3-digit security code on the back. At the bottom, in a looping feminine script for emergency use, M. I held the paper as if it might burn me. My breath caught my chest tightening with a fear I hadn't felt since Robert's death. When had Madison been alone long enough to make this copy, and what emergency required such precision? It wasn't a mistake. It was premeditated. A chill ran through me as I remembered the bank statement's charges. I never approved transactions at times when I was at home asleep. Could it be? Had she made more than one copy? Had she spread my information like seeds, waiting for them to bloom into debt I couldn't contain? The answer came sooner than I expected. 2 mornings later, the phone rang. The voice on the other end was young, tentative, but firm. "Mrs. Grant." "My name is Sophie Tran. I work at your bank. I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I noticed something unusual in your account activity." My knuckles whitened around the receiver. What kind of unusual withdrawals and purchases in the middle of the night? Electronics stores, online boutiques, even cash from ATMs. It doesn't fit the profile of someone like you. I thought you should be aware before it goes further. Her words blurred in my ears, but one phrase struck like thunder. Someone like you. She was right. I was 72, a widow who lived quietly, who hadn't bought a new dress in years, who still used the same kettle Robert gave me on our 10th anniversary. Midnight electronics designer shoes. They weren't mine. "Thank you, Sophie," I whispered. My voice cracked, betraying the quake inside me. "You've done more than you know." When I hung up, I stood in the kitchen staring at the faded wallpaper Robert and I once picked out together. The walls seemed to close in. This wasn't just overspending, it was invasion. My home, my bank account, my very identity slowly being stolen not by strangers, but by the woman my son had chosen to build his life with. And as that realization took root, I knew the battle had shifted. It was no longer about a password. It was about survival. The discovery of that photocopy and Sophie's warning left me sleepless for nights. I would lie in my bed, the moonlight carving pale lines across the ceiling, listening for every creak of the house, as if Madison herself might slip in to strip away what little I still controlled. Fear became a shadow at my side, but fear also sharpened me. And when Nathan and Madison returned, I was no longer trembling, I was braced. They came without knocking, their voices rising before their coats were off. Madison flung her purse onto the sofa, her face a mask of wounded dignity. Nathan's tone was colder rehearsed. "Mom, this can't go on. You're making paranoid decisions, changing passwords, accusing us of theft, imagining conspiracies. It's not normal." I stood by the mantel, hands steady, though my pulse raced. "What isn't normal," I answered, "is watching my money vanish at midnight while I sleep." Nathan stepped closer, lowering his voice as if to sound reasonable, though every word cut deeper. "We've talked to some people. There are processes, legal processes, to help when an elderly parent starts to lose her grip. Maybe it's time for someone else to handle your finances, someone you can trust." It took me a moment to realize what he was saying. Guardianship. My own son was suggesting stripping me of my rights, declaring me incapable, also he and his wife could sit at the helm of my life. "You want to put me on trial?" I whispered, my throat dry for daring to guard what I earned. Madison's eyes gleamed. "No one is punishing you, Eleanor. We just don't want you to embarrass yourself. It's for your own good." The fury rose in me like fire through dry wood. "This money," I said, my voice hard as stone, "was bought with 40 years of double shifts, with hands that ached until they bled, with a back that carried both you and your father's absence. Nathan, not one penny will be signed away under threat. Not to you, not to anyone." For the first time I saw hesitation flicker in his eyes, but Madison pressed forward relentless. "If you won't be reasonable, we'll have no choice. The court will see what's happening, your paranoia, your confusion, and they'll act. You can't stop it." I thought my knees might buckle, but at that moment the doorbell rang. David Miller, his timing uncanny, stepped inside. His gaze swept the room, reading the tension like an old judge measuring truth from lies. When I told him, his expression hardened. "Eleanor," he said, voice low, "this is no longer a family dispute. This is abuse. And if they want a courtroom, then you need someone who knows how to fight in one." He gave me a name, Victor Hayes, a lawyer who had built his career defending seniors stripped of their dignity by the people closest to them. That night, for the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear, resolve. If they wanted a trial, I would give them one, and I would not be the one who broke. Walking into the courthouse that morning felt like walking into a cathedral built of fear and steel. My knees ached, my palms were damp, but beside me stood Victor Hayes, calm and solid, his presence steadying me like the arm of a lifelong friend. David sat in the back row, a quiet sentinel. I reminded myself that I was not alone, even though my heart felt fractured. Across the aisle, Nathan avoided my eyes. Madison, however, met my gaze with a faint smirk, her red lipstick a banner of defiance. I had raised Nathan to respect truth. Yet here I was about to defend my sanity against my own child. The judge called the case and the air grew taut. Madison's lawyer painted me as a confused old widow, haunted by paranoia, incapable of handling her own affairs. His words dripped with pity, as if my years of work and sacrifice could be erased with a single phrase, "elderly decline." Then Victor rose. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but each word landed like a hammer. He placed my bank statements before the judge, highlighting the late-night withdrawals, the shopping sprees that stretched beyond reason. "Your Honor, Mrs. Grant was not losing her memory. She was losing her savings systematically siphoned away." And then came the first blow of truth. Surveillance footage flickered onto the screen, Madison sleek and confident swiping my card at boutiques and restaurants. Not once, not twice, over and over. Each image was a betrayal immortalized in pixels. The courtroom murmured the sound like a tide turning. Sophie Tran, the young banker, took the stand next. Her voice shook at first, but steadied with conviction. She described the red flags, the pattern of fraud, the way she had called me out of concern. Her words cut through Madison's carefully staged performance of innocence. Nathan was called. He shifted in his seat, his rehearsed lines faltering. I thought Mom approved those purchases." His voice cracked. For the first time, doubt flickered across Madison's face. She leaned forward, whispering furiously to him, but the cracks were visible. When Madison herself took the stand, she spun a story of sacrifice. "I did it for us, for the future of this family," she pleaded, hands pressed to her chest. But her performance collapsed when Victor dropped the final card on the table, proof of hidden debts. Credit owed not in my name this time, but hers. Luxury clubs, designer memberships, the so-called exclusive circle she had tried to buy her way into. The judge's voice, firm and unshaken, broke the air. This court not only rejects the petition for guardianship, but finds sufficient evidence of financial abuse. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson will repay Mrs. Grant in full. Furthermore, they are prohibited from contacting her directly for 1 year. The gavel struck. The sound reverberated through me like a heartbeat returned. Relief flooded in, but so did sorrow. Madison's debts spilled into the open, and I saw Nathan's marriage crack in real time. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow. My son had chosen the wrong battle, and in losing, he lost far more than money. The gavel's echo had barely faded when I realized the victory was only half mine. Yes, the court restored my dignity. Yes, the money would return in time, but as Nathan stood there silent, hollow-eyed, his marriage unraveling, before the world I understood what I had truly lost, my son. The boy I once held against my chest, the boy whose laughter once filled these very walls, now walked out of that courtroom like a stranger I would never fully know again. Days turned into weeks. Madison vanished quickly, retreating into the arms of an old lover, leaving Nathan to shoulder the ruins of debts and shame. I heard whispers from neighbors how he moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city, how he looked thinner, lonelier. He did not call me. I did not call him. Between us lay a silence heavier than any chain. And yet in that silence, something within me shifted. The grief was sharp, but so was the clarity. For 72 years I had lived as mother-wife caretaker. I had forgotten what it felt like simply to be Eleanor. Now, standing alone in my kitchen with the afternoon sun spilling across the tiles, I asked myself the question I had avoided for decades. What if survival also meant rebirth? Linda Parker, my old friend, became my anchor. She came with fresh-baked bread, with laughter that rolled like spring rain, with reminders that life did not end with betrayal. And then there was Victor Hayes. At first, he was just my defender, methodical, precise, unyielding in court. But afterward, when the battle was over, he began to linger. He came by with boxes of legal documents, but stayed to sip tea on my porch. He admired the roses Robert once planted, then offered to help prune them. Slowly, we discovered we shared more than just resilience. He was a widower, a man who had known loss, who found solace in soil and sunlight the way I did. One afternoon, while we knelt side by side in the garden, hands covered in earth, he looked at me with a gentleness that made my chest ache. "Eleanor," he said, "sometimes the hardest part of winning is realizing what you had to let go to get here." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat swelled and tears blurred the marigolds before me. Because he was right. To protect my freedom, my dignity, I had sacrificed the bond I thought unbreakable. A son. But in the quiet of that moment, as the breeze carried the scent of lavender and the world felt possible again, I realized something else. I had also reclaimed myself. No longer a bank account to be drained, no longer a woman shadowed by fear, just Eleanor, capable, whole, still worthy of trust, still capable of love. Perhaps the price of freedom is steep. Perhaps dignity demands loss. But as I stood that evening watching the first stars appear above my garden, I knew the truth sometimes to keep what matters most, our own worth. We must be willing to lose even what we once thought was irreplaceable.